Why do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? Does the celebration of Christmas on December 25th have pagan origins? According to the most popular theory today, that would be the case. And many believers and unbelievers alike believe that somehow the celebration of the birth of Jesus has been informed by pagan celebrations and by evangelistic efforts of early Christians. But is that the case? Let's take some time today to explore an article that was shared by Andrew McGowan. He published in biblicalarchaeology.org. He is a notable scholar. He is the dean and president of the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. And so we are not talking about a fringe scholar or a fringe voice within Christianity, but instead today we're going to spend some time looking at serious scholarship that confronts a very popular theory. Well, let's talk about that theory for a moment. It says the most loudly touted theory about the origins of the Christmas date is that it was borrowed from pagan celebrations. The Romans had their midwinter festival in late December. Barbarian peoples of northern and western Europe kept holidays at similar times. To top it off, in 274, we find that the Feast of Sol Invictus, or the Unconquered Sun, was established on December 25th. There it is. There's the whole evidence, the whole case. But it's not. Christmas, as the argument goes, is really a spin-off from these pagan solar festivals. According to this theory, early Christians deliberately chose these dates to encourage the spread of Christmas and Christianity throughout the Roman world. If Christmas looked like a pagan holiday, more pagans would be open to both the holiday and the God whose birth is celebrated. On some level, that makes sense, or at least seems to make sense. We know, for instance, that early Christians were not very interested in celebrating the birth of Jesus. They were eager to celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, to reflect upon it, to be reflective about his death, and to celebrate his resurrection. They also established dates upon which they celebrated the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and this happens very early on. Now, there are some myths about the origins of the resurrection as well. Some people will try to link that to pagan culture. We will attack that and demonstrate why that is false as we get close to Easter, and I really look forward to that. But we find that early Christians were not very interested in establishing a date for the celebration of Jesus' birth. Additionally, we know that later Christians did borrow from pagan culture and applied their beliefs to some practices that were common within the groups whom they tried to reach with the gospel. This happened especially as Christianity spread into Europe. And so we are not going to discount that at all today, although I think there are some aspects of that that are worth unpacking. We just simply don't have time for it in this video. Despite the popularity of the theory, we will find that it is not accurate historically, theologically. It does not correspond with truth. Now, why does this conversation matter before we get to the correspondence of truth with the claims that have been made, the evidence with the claims that have been made? Well, I think that this is a relevant topic because this is sort of a thorn in the side for the believer who might doubt whether this holiday is worth celebrating, or perhaps believes, at least to some degree, that celebrating on this date represents an alignment with something that is pagan, or somehow it is not fully God-honoring because it has been compromised in some way. For the unbeliever, this serves as a launching point for doubt. Somebody might easily try to align Christianity's beliefs about the birth of Jesus, especially the miraculous details such as the virgin birth. They might try to link this to pagan belief systems. And as I already noted, people try rather poorly to do this with the resurrection of Jesus as well. And so when we come to this topic, we are really talking about confronting doubt. And confronting doubt is important. It's important that we know the truth so that the truth might set us free. So that by learning the truth, we might have more trust in God, the God who was born of a virgin. on that day and that night in Bethlehem. And so Andrew McGowan continues on in this article. He says, despite its popularity today, this theory of Christmas's origins has its problem. It is not found in any Christian writing, for one thing, in antiquity. Now, this is a problem. We do not find early Christians saying, look, there is an evangelistic goal that can be realized by aligning the celebration of Jesus' birth with this pagan celebration. We don't find anybody making that argument in any way, nor do we find opponents of Christianity who were quick to highlight concerns that they had with Christianity and to mock it, just as happens today. We don't find anybody suggesting that the celebration of Jesus' birth in this time period was done because they were trying to establish a relationship with this pagan holiday. And so in some way, Christianity was just another one of these pagan cults. We don't find any kind of argument made in that way. In fact, it's not until the 12th century, we are told, that we find the first suggestion that Jesus' birth celebration was deliberately set at the time of pagan feasts. A marginal note on a manuscript of the writings of the Syriac biblical commentator states that in ancient times, the Christmas holiday was actually shifted from January 6th to December 25th, so that it fell on the same date as the pagan Sol Invictus holiday. And even the fact that January 6th is brought in here might be a curiosity to you, the thought that Christmas, that the birth of Jesus would be celebrated midwinter, because after all, we've all heard that allegedly shepherds were not in the fields with their sheep in the winter. And so even in the 12th century, while we find this spurious note that is made without any historical evidence to support it prior, that Christianity had embraced the celebration midwinter, he does that, or as it corresponded with the pagan festival, he does so by linking it to another date midwinter. And so he does that January 6th. We're going to talk about why that is as well in just a few moments. But for our sake today, we find that there is no early attestation of this date being established because of a pagan festival. The other problem that is realized by this is that while later Christians were quick to embrace aspects of pagan culture and religious practices and to integrate those into their own faith tradition, we do not find this early in Christianity. In the first 3 centuries of Christianity especially, we find an animosity towards the pagan practices and worship. We find Christians willing to die for their faith rather than, for instance, offer any sort of worship to the Roman emperor. This is significant in our development of thought, because we do not find Christians in the first 3 centuries borrowing at all from pagan culture. And so when somebody says, well, this became a dominant practice because Christians realized the benefits of adapting to pagan culture, this is simply an unfounded claim that does not correspond with anything that we understand to be true historically of the Christians who actually lived in that time period. There's a further point here, however, and that is that we know that the celebration of Jesus' birth happened before these festivals, such as Sol Invictus, ever came to be. What we find is that early Christians, especially in Africa, North Africa, that they celebrated the birth of Jesus on December 25th before that pagan celebration ever existed. We find in this article, it says the December 25th feast seems to have existed before 312, before Constantine and his conversion at least. As we have seen, the Donatist Christians in North Africa seem to have known it from before that time. Furthermore, in the mid to late 4th century, church leaders in the Eastern Empire concerned themselves not with introducing a celebration of Jesus' birthday, but with the addition of the December date to their traditional celebration of January 6th. Well, why did believers believe that Jesus was born on January 6th. Again, we are told that the birth of Jesus could not have taken place in winter. We're going to look at that again in a little bit. But what about this calculation of the birth of Jesus, and how do we account for the origin of Christmas being celebrated on December 25th? Well, McGowan says this: strange as it may seem, the key to dating Jesus' birth may lie in the dating of Jesus' death at Passover. This view was first suggested to the modern world by French scholar Louis Descenzi in the early 20th century, and I just slaughtered his name, I'm sorry, and fully developed by the American Thomas Talley in more recent years. But they were certainly not the first to note a connection between the traditional date of Jesus' death and his birth. Around 200, we find Tertullian of Carthage reported the calculation that the 14th of Nisan, the day of the crucifixion according to the Gospel of John, is the year Jesus died, was equivalent to March 25th in the Roman calendar. March 25th is, of course, 9 months before December 25th. What happens over the course of 9 months? It says it was later recognized as the Feast of the Annunciation, the commemoration of Jesus' conception. Thus, Jesus was believed to have been conceived and crucified on the same day of the year. Exactly 9 months later, Jesus was born on December 25th. This scholar would go on to explain that in antiquity, it was commonly believed that people died on the date upon which they were conceived. And so if you were conceived on February 5th, you would die on February 5th, and vice versa. And so when they looked at calculating when Jesus died, they simply went forward 9 months because they believed that previously had been conceived on that date. And so if you go 9 months from there, you come to December 25th, or in some calculations, you come to January 6th. Which, by the way, is why we have the 12 days of Christmas. Anyways, it continues on. It says, this idea appears in an anonymous Christian writing titled On Solstices and Equinoxes, which appears to come from 4th century North Africa. It states, therefore, our Lord was conceived on the 8th of the date of April in the month of March, or March 25th, which is the day of the Passion of the Lord and of his conception. For on that day he was conceived, on the same he suffered. Based on this, this article dates Jesus' birth to the winter solstice. Augustine, too, was familiar with this association. In On the Trinity, somewhere written between 399 and 419, he writes, for he, Jesus, is believed to have been conceived on the 25th of March, upon which day also he suffered. So the womb of the Virgin, in which he was conceived, where no one of mortals was begotten, corresponds to the new grave in which he was buried, wherein was never man laid, neither before him nor since. But he was born according to tradition upon December the 25th. And so we have believers in two different parts of the world using the same math at a very early point to establish the birth date of Jesus as December 25th. Now, this is rather spurious to the contemporary reader because, of course, we track the date upon which people are born, and we do not believe that people are born are conceived, rather, on the date that they later die. And if so, it's just by happenstance. It's not necessarily the case. And so we find here that this is the argument that was used in antiquity, and it was the calculation that was given to arrive at somebody's birthday. Now, this is recognized throughout church history, especially early on, but does that mean that Jesus was actually born on December 25th? And should Christians be dogmatic about Jesus being born on December 25th? And the answer, of course, is no. Just because early Christians believed that Jesus was born on December 25th does not mean that he was. In fact, I think it really doesn't matter necessarily. We celebrate the incarnation, we celebrate the virgin birth. We need not know the exact date. I sort of fall in line with the very early Christians who did not really care about the specific date. However, we can be sure through a historical analysis, through looking at how early people, how in antiquity people came to assign somebody's birth date, and how they did so for Jesus in distinct parts of the world, and how he was celebrated, as his birth was celebrated before festivals such as Sol Invictus ever came to be in places such as North Africa. We can be sure that this date did not have pagan origins, but instead was just something that represented a cultural belief. That the cultural belief, again, was that you died, the date upon which you died was the date that you had previously been conceived. And so I think that's really fascinating. Now, with that said, is it possible Jesus was born on December 25th? Well, some people today would say, well, there's going to be snow in Bethlehem around December 25th, and shepherds were not in the fields with their sheep around this time of the year, so it's not even possible. So it's quite ridiculous that anybody would celebrate Jesus' birth on this day. There is a problem with that. If you were to go to Bethlehem today, if you were to go ahead and get on a plane and fly overseas, you would, if you came into Bethlehem, you would note something, and that would be where there are shepherds, they are still in the fields with their sheep. In fact, the temperature in Bethlehem around this time period is very close to the temperatures around Tucson, Arizona. They are not similar, for instance, to the temperatures around Boston, Massachusetts. And so while Israel certainly does get cold around Bethlehem in this time period, there is not frequently snow on the ground. Also, we do, throughout history, have records of shepherds being with their sheep in the fields during December, even late December of the year. And so it is not impossible that shepherds were with their sheep in the field, nor, again, as I've already stated, does this date have any correspondence with pagan beliefs at the time in which it was established, even if later Christians did adapt some pagan practices and adapt them to their own faith tradition. I do hope that clears up some things for you and encourages you in the faith, knowing that you can worship God and you can celebrate the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ on December 25th with a clear conscience. I look forward to discussing other aspects of his birth next week in our discussion. May the Lord bless you.